One song that stands out as a good example of a song that began with a curious new instrument that I designed from a little fragment of sound is called Live Another Life. It's a recording from our friend SK Kakraba, who's a Ghanaian xylophone player. It's an instrument called a gyil, that's G-Y-I-L. And it's just this tiny little roll that he did, but it's slowed way down. It forms the rhythmic backbone of the song. So here it is just looping. Basically, that tiny little sound, if I play it back at 2 different pitch levels, I could imply a chord progression by playing 2 notes at a time. Because it's a pitched instrument, playing 2 notes at a time sort of implies a chord, right? They're dyads. But it also results in a really kind of confusing rhythmic thing, but with enough layers it starts to kind of make sense. It's complex, but it is something that feels almost rational. In order to adapt to the implied tempo of these dyads happening together and their composite rhythm, I actually have to alternate the BPM, which proved to be apparently not a big enough challenge for Ian, our drummer, who figured out a way to play against it. So tempo change here. Barely hear it. And then tempo change here. But the jumble of those rhythms like sort of heave together to create an amazing like cumulative mass that just feels very, very cool. The other instrument that I designed based on a small fragment of performance is with a cello that was muted with a heavy mute. And what that does is it eliminates a ton of the fundamental pitch and it makes it sort of like airier. All it is the same performance and slightly different start times. And it looks like I've hard panned them and then I've tuned them so that, yeah. And then again, I've assigned a filter to the mod wheel so I can create a really nice, beautiful, warm. You know, the performance is infused with variation and friction. Here's the kind of the original, somewhere around here. Actually, it's probably here. Super awesome. Tons of bow noise. You can filter it out, or you can keep it in. Those 2 instruments they do a lot of heavy lifting in the song. Let's hear that instrument in context. You know, it's super simple, but something about it is so strange and evocative. It's like you can't quite put your finger on what's happening sonically. Simple, but really interesting, I think. Just a simple piano. Just release me, dear. A little screwed up piano, but just those 3 elements. Nothing changes except a piano on the bass and another layer of the gyil. The additional layers of the gyil sort of build up to create an accumulation that feels like really frenetic. Again, this is really just simple playback of a sample. So here it is in context. Listen to how they accumulate. You know, you can clearly hear they're operating at like 2 different tempos. But again, it's the composite as they accumulate where they start to sort of make sense. I'm looking for rationality inside of irrationality. Now my ear is naturally drawn to the top voice. And you can't even tell it, but the tempo is changing. It's alternating, and it's changing by kind of a lot, 3 BPM every other bar. And Rafiq is doing something similar. Layers of guitar. He's articulating the chord progression, but the internal mechanism that he's creating is irrational. You might have noticed that I'm sort of drawn to sounds that maybe are off kilter, or there's not like some clear rhythmic articulation. I'm trying to use context to generate a familiarity with that sound, which will then lend itself to perceiving that sound as a groove or as a foundational rhythm. And I think the key to that is often, like I said, context, providing anchor points with maybe another instrument that allow us to hear the original sound in a way that, oh, my brain actually accepts this as rational or as pocketed, having a deep pocket. And with the right anchor points, you can actually shift perception of that groove too, especially if it's not a straightforward rhythmic figure. Like in this case, even as crazy as the gyil is, you start to hear the rationale in the gyil. So, oh yeah, there's regular changes. There's an intervallic lunge, and of course, that helps. So a lot of times I work with live musicians early in the process to generate raw material, like I've done today. There's usually another stage as well where I bring musicians back to kind of execute maybe parts that I've then written. But even in those situations, I am looking for a good deal of surprise. My arrangements are not so fixed that they don't allow for the player to bring an interpretation to them. Because even at the very last minute, I'm still looking for not a perfect performance, but I'm looking for something that is sort of magic that you couldn't really plan. That's what I'm always looking for, whether it's the beginning or the end of the process. Subscribe to Soundfly to get started.